Deanna Day, and this is my grandfather, John Day, perhaps better known to you all as Dean Day. And we're here this morning to talk a little bit about Dr. Cornell Bell.
Thank you, Deanna. And thanks to all of you who have invited me to speak this morning about my relationship with Dr. Bell and the part he played in developing the BOP program, as well as eventually increasing the number of Afro-Americans and other minorities in our master's program. Above all, Dr. Bell was not only a professor in the Cornell School, but he was also my good friend.
Why don't you tell us about the start of the Business Opportunities Program and the important part Dr. Bell had in its formation and development?
I'm very happy to do that. Right after the assassination of Martin Luther King, several of our faculty members, under the leadership of Dan Schindel, whom I believe has talked to you at some time before, about the possibility of us establishing a program in Cornell that would attract young men into a business degree curriculum. As probably you may know, the typical student of Afro-American descent, when he or she came to Purdue, they went to the humanities school and studied some kind of social science or art form, or over in physical education as a means perhaps of eventually becoming a well-paid athlete. Dan's idea was that he and his fellow colleagues would each contribute about $500, which they would donate to the Purdue Research Foundation, getting a totaling amount sufficient to support perhaps 10 or 12 students in a summer program, summer remedial program, to make it possible for them to become successful freshmen in our undergraduate program. And Dan then added, as he left with a sly wink, and of course, Dean, we expect you to raise enough money to pay us back, which eventually I did. The faculty, once we had approved the program, which was very easy, the faculty began to do recruiting in the Gary school system. As a result of their efforts, we attracted 11, I believe, freshman students to undertake this special program, which we call the Business Opportunity Program. We were not very successful in that first year. Before the end of the first year, one student had dropped out to transfer over to science education and humanities to become a poet. Another had left to join the Army, and the third one had gotten into some kind of a problem with the police. The remaining students did finish the first term, or first semester, but with, let's say, mediocre success. As the faculty and I gathered to talk about it, we realized we really didn't know very much about what one should be doing with this kind of a program. It was completely new to us. And one member suggested that maybe we tried to get one of the administrators from the Gary system to come down and spend a term or a year with us to get the program successfully underway. Dr. Cornell Bell had really impressed the faculty members during their recruiting effort as being a person who really knew what the problems of young people are. And as a result, we encouraged him to take a leave of absence and to join our faculty, at least for, as I recall, 1 year, which he did. Shortly after coming aboard and interviewing what we had done, he came into my office and sat down and then said, "Dean, you know what? You don't know what the hell you're doing." To which I quickly agreed, because it was obvious we didn't. At any rate, he undertook to straighten out some of the problems we had, and at the end of the year left to go back to Gary. Quite frankly, although he had made some changes and had helped us solve some problems, we still weren't doing a very good job. And at the end of that year, I decided that the only way we could be successful was to, in fact, attract Dr. Bell to become a permanent member of our faculty. I met with Dr. Bell, and as you might expect, there were certain problems which would crop up if he once retired from the Gary school system. First of all was his salary. And obviously I could not bring him in as an assistant professor. And so I promised I would bring him in as an associate professor. Secondly, he was involved in his work for his PhD at Indiana University. That was really a plus card in my argument, because I said, well, if you came to Purdue, I think I could make arrangements with the education department to transfer your credits complete from IU, and therefore you would be here on campus, able to attend any classes and to do your work with the kind of help that we could give you for secretarial services and so forth. And finally he said, well, I want to live at home. I really don't want to give up my home. And furthermore, he said, I think my wife would expect that. And I said, well, if you don't want to move to Lafayette, what do you think about renting an apartment here and arriving on Monday morning and leaving Friday afternoon? And as a result, we were able to rent an apartment over in the dormitory for graduate students, which is right next to the Cornell building. The long shot of it was that he said goodbye to Gary school system and joined us as an associate professor of management in the Cornell school. And thus we had our first and in fact only director of the BOP program all the time that I was dean of the school.
What other fond memories do you have of Dr. Bell?
Oh, so many, oh, so many. As I said earlier, he was a friend. And as a result, we often conferred together, not only about things in the university, but our personal lives. We got to know his wife Mildred very well, and Barbara and I would have had Dr. Bell and Mildred to our house a number of times. He was a person who really had a big heart. After the program was up and running very well under his leadership, he would often, at the beginning of the year, bring in his new freshmen and assemble them in the drawing room to meet the dean. I would give them a little pep talk, and eventually he would, at the end of the more or less formal ceremonies, would have them group on the stairs for a group picture. This particular day, I noticed he was looking at one young lady in a blue dress and said to me while they were assembling, he said, John, do you know who that girl is? And I said, no, Cornell, I don't. He said, I don't recall recruiting her, and I know the name of every student there. So as the meeting broke up, he approached her and he said, Miss, what's your name? And she told him her name. And then he said, well, I don't recall recruiting you and asking you to come to Purdue. Oh no, she said you didn't, but my best friend Mary over there told me what a wonderful program it was and what a wonderful guy you are, and so I thought I'd come down and join. There was a moment of dead silence on my part, and I said, you know, I said, we have a little problem. And Cornell says, yeah, I know. He said, we probably don't have any money for it. Well, I said, Cornell, we can put our heads together, and you and I probably will come up with enough money for this young lady. At another time, he had invited his students to meet, and after the meeting, he said, you know, I said, I think we have a problem. And I said, well, what is that, Cornell? He said, well, he said, Miss Jones has said that she doesn't have any money for the tuition. And when is she going to get it? I said, Cornell, We issued those tuition checks weeks ago. Well, he said, let's ask her. So, the young lady faced us, and we said, didn't you receive a check a couple of weeks ago? And she said, oh, yes. We said, well, what happened to it? Oh, she said, I understood that was my spending money, so I blew it all at once to go to the Caribbean. Cornell and I looked together at one another, and we both said almost simultaneous, you know what this program needs? It's a program in financial management of your own life, and it'd be a required course. I said, well, that still doesn't solve the problem of what we do about this young lady. Well, to make a long story short, we worked and scraped and figured out this and that and finally got enough money. But we had a real big heart, and as you well know, his students were in fact his children. Bringing Cornell into the university, on one hand, was relatively easy, as I've explained. And on the other hand, there were those faculty, particularly some of the young hotshots, who resented the fact that this man who didn't have his PhD yet and who had no previous college experience was brought in as associate professor, while they had to, with all of these additions of rank and so forth, had come in as an assistant professor. And I remember one day we were having lunch with one of these young men, and the conversation got about a little personal about our lives. And finally this young professor said, Cornell, tell me, how is it you plan to go to a university? I mean, how is it you plan to go to IU? And Cornell, with a little smile, looking him directly in the eye, said, you know, probably was because of a family tradition. Both my father and grandfather went to IU. That was enough to quiet our young professor. At another time, my assistant dean for undergraduate admissions and Cornell were on a recruiting trip up in Gary. And we pulled into this, I believe it was the Gary Tolleson High School. In the parking lot, Cornell at the time was driving a Cadillac sedan, several years old. It was quite a modest-looking car, nothing flamboyant. And the car they pulled in alongside of was a sporty coupe, very racy-looking, very upbeat. So Dick said to Cornell, Cornell, he said, you shouldn't be driving this old Cadillac. He said, you ought to be driving that sporty little car next to us. Cornell, with a smile, turned to him and said, you know, Dick, I do drive it fairly often. It's my wife's car. Mildred was a special ed student in the Gary system. And I could go on with other stories about Cornell. Another time, the university had decided to bring aboard a woman, Afro-American lady, who was being used as sort of a coordinator of some of the programs in which African-American students were involved. And so she sort of had the idea she wanted to coordinate everything that was going on campus that had to do with African-Americans. She called Cornell up and said, Cornell, let's meet. I know you have a fine program over there, but I'd like to talk to you about it. So in the meeting, according to Cornell, she began to complain about how hard it was to get people together, that people didn't show up for meetings and they weren't on time and so forth and so on. And finally, he's told me he stood all he could and said to her, Miss Jones, you know, you don't know really what frustration is, he said. If you really want to know, become the principal of a school, and on Monday morning, have at least 10 of your teachers call in sick. They didn't make it back on time. They had some emergency meeting, and you're faced with a job of finding substitutes to cover all those classes before class begins. Then he said, you know what frustration is. And this was Cornell at his prime. No way interested in taking a position of complaint, but only seeing the challenges ahead. And so it was that Cornell and I spent those years together. Now, in 1978, I was asked to become vice president of the for development for the university. I accepted the position, and so for the next 4 or 5 years, I only saw Cornell occasionally and really didn't get intimately involved with him. When I reached the age of 65, the Purdue had the requirement that senior executives would step down, and I went back to teaching at Cornell and took over the teaching of a section of the senior level policy course. It was a pleasant return to the kind of work I did in my early years in the academic world. However, like most professors, I had my problem students. And one of these students was a young lady, African American, who obviously was not doing her work. She seldom participated in class, and when called upon, it was obviously she wasn't too prepared. I announced that a midterm exam was going to take place, and it was going to cover the subject matter we had discussed so far this term. Next thing I heard, Cornell said, "Hey, Dean," he said, "I want to come down and talk with you." I said, "Come ahead." Came down, he said, "Well," he said, "you've been put on report by Susie." And I said, "Who?" He said, "No, she's a Susie so-and-so, a girl." "Oh, yes." I said, "I know her." He said, "Well, she complained that the reason she was unable to get her work done is that you kept staring at her all the time. You made her very uncomfortable. You obviously didn't like her, and every time she looked around there, you were staring at her." So I asked her, "Susie, where do you sit?" She said, "I sit in the front row in the classroom." She said, "Whereabouts in the front row?" "In the center section." We said, "How in the world could Dean Day not see you since you're sitting all the time 7 feet in front of him?" So you know what I told her? I told her to go back and start studying, because that's the only way she was going to get ahead in your class. And so, in a sense, that was the last time that year that we were again compatriots in the Cornell School. By that time, Cornell had built a national reputation for his work with the BOP program. And also he had been a very significant recruiter for our master's program. And I'm sure that some of you out there may very well have been students in that master's program. Cornell is certainly a person who the Cornell School owes much of a success in the area of working with underprivileged and also African American students. One of the outstanding programs in the country, and due primarily to Cornell Bell. And I think you know that the university finally recognized that, and the school recognized that when they awarded them an honorary doctorate degree. Right. So I think probably I've talked enough to let you know that this is a fine man, not only as a professor but also as an individual, and that I thoroughly respect all the work and contribution he made to our school. A short time before Cornell passed away, I called him, and it was a wonderful moment. We talked, I don't know how long, it was at least a half an hour, maybe more, reviewing all the times we'd worked together, all the problems we've solved, all the crises that we had managed, and above all, talked about how great our friendship had been during those years when we both were striving to make the BOP and the master's program better for the kinds of people you represent. Good luck, and God be with you in your further endeavors. I know many of you have made a great success in the business world, and I hope that you'll continue to do so and advance further and carry the name of Cornell Bell and the BO3 program to the younger generations coming along. Thank you. I appreciate this offer to be with you, and may your meeting have great success. Goodbye.